term performative as it coincides with fashion, and why today we have a personal style and authenticity issue, how the internet and our current culture has brought us to this point. And I want to talk about broader moments in culture like the celebrity rebrand and why I think this is a reflection of where we're at this point. So I read a really interesting essay in this book. I've been reading this very slowly, taking my time, because every single page is like so much to take in and write down and think about. I feel like it's making me think about fashion and the world and a broader scale of everything, but let's get into it. I'm going to structure this video in sections that serve as sort of a timeline to how these fundamental ideas began and how they turned into what the internet has crafted of them today. And along the way, I'm going to read a couple of quotes from this essay, of course, as it just really makes it sound so beautiful and perfect, and I love it so much. So, section 1, fashion versus costume, and I'm starting by reading, "The temporary system of fashion does not coincide with the millennial and transcultural history of costume. It is not the simple contemporary version of this series of appearances or fabrics placed on a surface." And that's not to say that costume design is literally just putting a piece of fabric on a blank slate. There's more to it, there's more psychology, there's more of an exploration, but it's basically saying that fashion of our own mind represents rituals, thoughts, and decisions that we make in our head. It says something about ourself, no matter how subconscious or thoughtful it is. It's something that costume doesn't replicate in the same way, because costume has a difference between the clothing and the person. You're putting it on someone to reflect something that you're not necessarily in conversation with. Sometimes there are moments where you're in conversation with the character that you're creating on someone else, like if you're doing a biopic and you're still talking to the person that the biopic is based off. That's different. But yeah, fashion is this very personal thing, and it's something that can easily have no thought behind it because it's automatic, and that's a huge difference between a costume design and just putting on your outfit for the day. Fashion became not only one of the arts, but also the most radical and universal form of artistic practice, of manipulation and use of matter to produce and enjoy a particular form of freedom. Costume design is really highly regarded when a person can dive deep into the historical figure, the cultural figure, the fictional character, and truly understand what they would wear and what would they reflect during the time period, the culture they live in. And it becomes a very psychological practice, and when you're able to get that close to something that you're not really able to communicate with and get to the root of together, that character is not able to tell you what they want, you're pretty much trying to dig and study and come up with that character through clothing. So that's when it's very highly regarded, because it's not normal to be able to speak to a fictional character and understand what they want in a particular moment. You can do that with real people, and stylists and subjects have a communication together that allows them to really trade ideas, and you get to the person's mind just by speaking with them. But fashion is really just this instinctual nature where you're just putting on something for the day. Take, for example, my brother will wear the same rotation of JCPenney t-shirts, and he'll replace them when the ones he's wearing get old. And even that is more of a personal decision than that of creating a character further from yourself. That says a lot about personal style, even though it's not necessarily style or trying to be fashion. Clothing is the most universal artifact that can exist in human societies. It is used by everyone, regardless of class, age, geographical origin, religion, ethnic identity, or gender. And we use clothes every day, whether weekdays or holidays. In fact, it is clothes that mark the quality of time. We use them all day long, even when sleeping, even in bed. We have to redesign our anatomy in part thanks to clothes. So yes, daily rituals, they say something about someone's mind. So this is basically fashion on the most simple level before it becomes artistic expression, belonging to communities of people that share values that are represented through fashion, and before it becomes a known art form in someone's mind. It is just what you have to do and what people just do as ritual and instinct. So thinking about the little epidemic we had of TikTok aesthetics and micro trends, these failed so quickly because they came across more as a costume than personal fashion. The internet kind of gave us these little trends to follow, and there's something fun about a quirky idea being popular in the internet, and people will play with that and have fun with it. But when it comes to the speed in which these trends came about, there's no time for someone to build up a proper understanding of how it relates to them and a wardrobe that is high quality and reflective and meaningful and intentional. And so often these trends were followed in a very costumey, quick, easy way, and they died the next day, and people threw out everything they had because they bought these pieces that would give them this little identity in the moment, and then realized they didn't want to do that anymore, whether it was because the next big thing came along or because it wasn't really them once they actually saw what everything was, and it's not the root of who they were and what they want to dress as. So all of this ended up being waste, and it was a half-baked version of an identity. I have a little bit of an opinion when it comes to certain fashion designs that are more architectural and structural, and it's on a case-by-case basis. I love some designers that are more architectural, like Issey Miyake, because their ethos really ties in with humanity and why they're doing this, and the fact that these are architectural shapes that are made to coincide with the human body in a beautiful way, in a way that people love to wear. But I do see a lot of structural and architectural projects that when put on a model, I feel like I lose who the model is, and it feels more like a costume to me. Now, a lot of student designers use these architectural and structural forms in order to showcase brilliant technical skill, and that to me is a very, very valuable purpose. But sometimes I feel like the concept of a clothing piece that doesn't feel wearable being put on a subject kind of hides the subject for me. And I like fashion as a communication between a subject and what I think they would wear and what they tell me they would wear, and how I can produce a perspective through that. And I don't know, there's something about a piece of clothing that just feels so inhuman in a way that kind of turns this object of fashion that has become a second skin back into an artistic object, and it doesn't feel like someone's skin. It doesn't feel natural in a way, and that's my opinion. It really, really is a case-by-case basis, because there are some moments where I'm gonna change my mind about it and really appreciate an architectural form, how it's presented, and there are some days where I feel like it doesn't make sense. But the point of it is you need to get to the root of the person, and art is a very personal, emotional experience between whether it's your own contemplation or a relationship with someone else. And I feel like hiding that person, if that particular item of clothing does that, kind of is counterintuitive to the natural process of someone's fashion. And it feels more like a costume. It feels like a shield of something else that the model is now behind. I like fashion that feels like the subject is going to really wear it, and I think about photography when it is this kind of fashion meets documentary sort of storytelling, sometimes emotional portraiture. And I love the work of Juergen Teller, Eddie Slimane, and Richard Avedon, because they're really finding the personality of their subject. It's not like they're going home and painting something. They're present in the moment with another person, and part of the story that they're telling has to be that other person's personality. The photographer has their own perspective and the subject has their own perspective, but it's the relationship, what the subject is saying to the photographer, what the photographer is seeing, and how the person moves and what the person says that creates this well-rounded image. And I feel the same way about styling, because you need to get to the bottom of that person's personality and who they are, and similar to a portrait, you're having a relationship. The stylist has taste that they want to put into the moment. The subject has a personality and things that they find themselves naturally wearing, and it's a collaboration between two minds and that moment in which they communicate. So I would say there is a big difference between costume and styling, whereas costume, you have this distance and you're kind of figuring it out on your own most of the time based on history and accounts and things that you can't really get in person from the subject, but styling is more of a collaboration where the two people can actually communicate, similar to a portrait where the subject has things to say, things to show, and the stylist has knowledge and a perspective that coincides with the subject, and they work together on something, and it creates a beautiful moment of fashion, the same way that it can create a beautiful picture and a beautiful bit of storytelling. Next, I want to talk about identity and how fashion can create a sense of belonging, because fashion is a second skin and it serves as a language without having to speak. You can really insert your personality and the internal thoughts, ideas, and concepts and values that you have in your brain onto your body in a way that people 10 feet away will totally understand if they are in line and similarly thinking. To wear clothing is to reverse the relationship we usually have with a work of art. Rather than placing it at a distance, in a place separated from our daily lives, and thus sporadically coming into contact with it, we make it adhere to our body, we merge with it, and we let it sculpt our identity. Clothes have become the Trojan horse that makes art and life coincide. That is, they transform life into something entirely defined by art. Conversely, because of fashion, each of us is placed in the position of having to produce something artificial in our lives and turn our lives into artifacts and artworks. There is no more naturalness possible. Again, this is where fashion merges with our skin and allows clothing to be such a unique form of art because there is no distance. We're not making a painting or a sculpture and putting it off to the side. While that is deeply reflective of how we think and who we are, we're not bringing that around to show everyone. Whereas fashion and designers and their worlds help us to communicate the ideas inside of our head, and we put these clothes on and we live the day in an outfit, and then people can see that from us. Fashion is not only the technique of making clothes, but also the art of shaping the whole real world, inhabited by human beings and even the whole imaginary world. Fashion, because it is so intrinsic to the way that people think and a collective consciousness of a society where we are in a time period, the status quo, it basically serves as historical markers. We can see how people were dressing and understand a little bit about their culture and their values through the clothing that they wore. You have the 50s, it's very buttoned up in a way. And then you have the 60s, it becomes a little bit more boho and free-spirited as it moves into the 70s. And then we move to the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. Women were more commonly wearing pants in the later decades, and people adopted more progressive ways of thinking, and clothing became less restrictive and traditional as the years went on, became more exciting and artistic in ways, and each decade of the 1900s is basically just a really cool time capsule of being able to see how people's minds and fashion coincided and how society changed, how a collective consciousness evolved over time. So even deeper than this way of seeing decades as evolutions to collective consciousness, there are little groups and pockets of people that are the weird ones, the ones that challenge the status quo, and these little subcultures are what form the next brewing ideas and identities throughout the greater collective consciousness of culture and society. These are little groups of people that end up becoming movements for different ways of thinking that end up becoming more modern and changing the way that we look at lifestyles and how we want to present ourselves. And when they first start, it's a weird little group. Like the one that I grew up knowing the most about because my mom was a part of it in Sydney is the punk movement of the 70s, very famous in England, but also in places such as Australia where my mom was a part of that. She tells me about how her first punk outfit was wearing her dad's white button-down and a tie and pants, and coming from a family where there were many moments of traditional dressing for dinner, like women wearing feminine outfits and the dad wearing a suit jacket, things like that. It was radical to have this girl wear such just an unexpected outfit for this time. It just doesn't make sense. It's not a feminine, particularly traditional moment of fashion. It's something new. It's something crazy in a way. But yeah, she moved on to manage the foremost punk venue of Sydney, which very much started artists such as Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, their first ever shows and things like that. And the punk movement, when you think about it, it is this very raw kind of way of looking at life, and it coincides with fashion because they wouldn't go shopping in a store and wear something normal. They would go to a thrift store and cut things up, and it wasn't necessarily an act of being a fashion designer either. It was like people who didn't even know how to sew, they just wanted to throw something together that was different and interesting and kind of reflected this change of thought for the world in a way. And today, punk is mainstream in this weird way because these ideas start with this tiny, tiny little movement and then become something that people can get a hold of and grasp. And so these subcultures, they move throughout history and they end up creating bigger, little tiny revolutions of thought and lifestyle and how people want to modernize and live as the years go by. I've also seen people find a sense of belonging and community through groups that aren't necessarily subcultures because they remain niche, and these are groups that are based on being a fan of a particular fashion designer. Think people who call themselves Rickheads, or people interested in archival fashion, or brands such as Comme des Garçons, Jill Sander, Yohji Yamamoto, Issey Miyake. These are very, very select groups, and these people wear basically everything of that one designer because they love the designer's ethos and find like-minded people through what the designer is saying and how this person relates to the designer, and just a lot of depth to this one person's world building and creative direction and design. Like, there is a lot that goes into each designer's world and what they view from the world, what they take from the world, structures, shapes that inspire them. There's just so much, and these people find a deep connection to each other because of how thoughtful this design and world is. And I've seen it in Facebook groups and forums and things like that. But something really beautiful about it is that I will see people in a Facebook group based on a designer. They end up falling in love after meeting online and they get married, and it's just really special. It's this really sweet niche kind of group. It's not necessarily trying to do something, or it's not necessarily anything that is going to catch on to the general public of people beyond just fans of that fashion designer. But it's really sweet, and it's really telling of how humanity wants to find people who understand them in ways, and it's just really beautiful. Now I'm going to talk about how trends can manipulate this deep want for community and like-minded people and friends and love. Fashion, being a form of communication, helps you to find people who think similarly or enjoy similar things, and that can create love and things that we crave before anything else in our lives. So advertisers, marketers, and brands know this, and they capitalize on trends and lifestyles, selling people a lifestyle and selling people the solutions to the things that they most want in their life. Modernity is a place where pre-established identity is destroyed and where individuals are obliged to build it themselves. Identity thus ceases to be purely social and becomes also psychological, idiosyncratic. One is an individual without being a hero because one constructs the self and one's identity without having to perform particular acts. To build the self, however, modern subjects are obliged to delegate to objects the tasks of making their psychological identity exist. To do it only by means of anatomy and language perhaps would impose a series of enormous ritual efforts. By surrounding themselves with objects into their own skin, modern individuals unload otherwise impossible performances onto things. Instead of being vulnerable and having a conversation or engaging in a ritual that may be embarrassing or difficult, fashion is this easy layer of ourselves that we can project onto the world and show other people without having to be in tough situations. And that sounds so like, woo, like stupid, because it's like, touch grass, just talk to someone, like chill. But it's true. Even to the most extroverted person you know, their clothing is still saying something about themselves, an interest, a hobby, a ritual, a personality trait, comfort versus whatever. But we do this thing. We collect things that represent ourselves and create our own aesthetic and worlds, and it's a thing that people just do over time. And trends can manipulate us into thinking so quickly what the next thing we need to pile into our life is. Fashion is the attempt, literally, to put our identity in our own hands. Conversely, it is also the evidence that in order to change our identity, it is enough to modify its sensitive consistency. Our future self is the result of a sensitive manipulation of our present. This is where things go downhill. Because brands know that people are so sensitive, they're able to come out with things at a speed that's unnatural. And I mostly talk about fast fashion when I discuss this, because fast fashion produces things at such an unnatural rate that it kind of does depend on these microtrends and any other types of movements in social media that people suddenly want to latch hold of and follow. People purchase things way too quickly because it's easy. A brand is basically saying, we have the answer to you wanting to express yourself and meet other people and find community and find love. And it's only $10, so you can get it as quick as you want to. And it leads people to not be as thoughtful as they would if they were buying a high quality piece, or if they had restrictions on their budget, or, anything that is natural. That we cannot just have everything that we want in 2 seconds. We wouldn't know what to do with ourselves, usually. Identity is neither a natural fact nor a predefined category that can be imposed by violence. It is not a fixed and immutable fact, but rather a cultural and social construction. And as a construction, it is an object of choice, of adherence, and of invention. The identity is thus a process which makes itself each time available for a new determination. The world changes, and people always want to catch up with it because they think that if they're exactly where the world is saying they are and need to be, then they will be cool. Like, cool girl marketing is something that we've seen in previous years where brands have said, this is the new cool girl thing. And you gravitate to wanting to be that girl who has her finger on the pulse, knows what's new and trending, and they want to just be in the know. They want to be cool. And so if a brand says that to them and the product is $2, immediately they're gonna buy it. And that's why brands like Shein and Zara and H&M are so successful, because you can come out with an aesthetic and it can become very viral and popular, and people will buy 100 new items of that aesthetic and then realize that it doesn't align with themselves emotionally. It's not part of just their natural process of seeing things they like and experiencing them. It's not high quality, it's not good quality. Most of the time these things are ripping on day 2. And as soon as the new trend comes out tomorrow, if these people want to be at the top of the trend cycle, they're going to start all over tomorrow. And all these things are going to just be trashed, because brands know that if they can tell people that their problems will be solved overnight with this new little collection, they'll have all the friends they want in the world. The same thing with this weird thing, like looks maxing. Like, people are saying if you change the way you look, you're going to be successful overnight, which is so stupid. It's kind of the same thing. It's like this quick fix to deep-rooted human journeys and just experiences that we have, like our own journey in life. Like, this is not a quick and easy thing. It's something that you just have to live and be intentional about. And I know it sounds heady, but this is exactly, like, fashion is a representation of these thoughts and these ideas and the way we look at the world. I'm very interested in the fact that Vogue predicts fashion as feeling as a trend for 2026, because AI kind of serves as this tipping point. Suddenly analog is trendy and people want to go back to a slower way of life, and we want to express ourselves creatively. We don't want to maximize time over our own process of living and experiencing life as a human. And so little micro trends and TikTok aesthetics die down because people appreciate the journey more. They appreciate going on a vacation and spending 10 days somewhere random where a store they stumble upon is completely off the map, and they find this little thing that they've just ended up carrying around with them for the rest of time. I knew I wasn't going crazy when I never liked the bag charms trend, because it just felt so fake. Like, what do you mean you're customizing your bag with a bunch of trinkets that you have no personal connection to because you just bought it on TikTok Shop 2 seconds ago? This is not a representation of you customizing your bag. It just didn't make sense to me. And I also don't like toys and trinkets that much anyway, so I could be biased, but it just felt half-baked again, like this fake representation of identity. Now we get to the part where the concept of performative takes shape, because as people are getting sick of fashion without feeling, AI-generated trends in fashion, and a fast-paced robotic society that has lost depth and journey and feeling, we're starting to coin things as performative. And it reminds me of a costume, it reminds me of inauthenticity, and concepts like that, the antithesis to your own connection with your mind and the clothes that you wear. We never think about it, but you don't need a subcutaneous chip implant to become a cyborg. A suit of clothes is enough. According to the original definition, a cyborg is actually a technological modification of an organic body that allows it to survive in a new environment. A garment is, by definition, the modification that one imposes on oneself to resist the environment. We went on the moon only thanks to a garment. Here is the power of fashion. Alessandro Michele creates this runway show to show that fashion is this weird kind of thing where we become cyborgs because we decorate ourselves with objects and we live with props in order to share our minds. And this idea is something that reminds me of being in a coffee shop with a matcha and a laptop, and you're creating an identity through these little props. It reminds me of being a freshman in university, and I would put my film camera on my desk hoping that it would be a conversation starter. All of these are these rituals. Oh, or people reading on the train, but then your page is page 1. Like, what do you mean you're reading a book? Like, you just started it. It feels fake. And so people say it feels performative when it feels fake. Like, people are using props to identify themselves and to have people walk up to them, find people who are like-minded without really trying. And it's funny because fashion kind of does this silent communication thing as well, but performative is just you're creating this whole thing. Like, the props are where people get a little bit like, no, because fashion could easily just be, I'm wearing workout clothes, I'm going to the gym, done. No props. You're not carrying around a barbell and walking to the gym like this and be like, yeah, I go to the gym. Like, whatever. There's a difference. Like, it gets to a point. Also reminds me that a couple years ago, I heard a TED Talk speaker talk about the fact that our phones can, at this point, genuinely be considered an extension of our brain. We keep our memories there. We keep our information there, our knowledge, like photos, words, our social media, our connection to people. It's our brain. It's like what we do when we're bored. We scroll when we're bored, and it's like this kind of piece of ourselves that is a machine, and it's like, ooh, you're like, I don't know, it's so weird. The word performative used to have a different, more philosophical connotation to it, where performing something meant just like acting as the way that you think. Like, I'm a girl, and let's say I'm outside and I'm reapplying my lipstick. I'm performing femininity. And it used to just be like a philosophical characterization for just the way that you behave, and more of like a sociological, behavioral study sort of word. But it's turned into this inauthenticity, creating a costume, becoming something you're not, like performative as in it's not real, you're just putting on a performance. Like, basically the difference between fashion and costume is like performing your daily whatever for no one except for yourself, or putting on a show, and that's not who you are, but you're attracting things based on an alluring character that you're actually not. I want to close out with the idea of the celebrity rebrand as sort of a symbol for where we are collectively as a society with these concepts and these things that we're encountering, because I would say that it is the perfect packaging and repackaging of identities that is done on the broader, more of an example to the world stage, and it's something much bigger than the way that we do it in our daily lives. I'm going to reread this. Identity is neither a natural fact nor a predefined category that can be imposed by violence. It is not a fixed and immutable fact, but rather a cultural and social construction. And as a construction, it is an object of choice, of adherence, and of invention. The identity is thus a process, never definitively concluded, which makes itself each time available for a new determination. So while people rebrand themselves based on what is cool, celebrities also do this. Musicians do a complete overhaul of their personality in order to remain relevant and to be able to tell their stories in a way that the general public will listen to them. And isn't that so crazy? And I see this with artists such as Sabrina Carpenter with her little baby doll pinup persona. And it makes sense to the stories that she wants to tell and how she communicates through her songs, and it works. But it's so interesting how engineered it is. And I don't think it's always been this way to this much of an extent. Like, the fact that Zara Larsson, a vocalist, just someone who is genuinely so talented, has been singing her heart out since she was a little kid, about 10 years old. How has this person not reached a level of success that they are at now without having a dolphin meme and a theme around vacation and dressing like she's on the beach, or the makeup, the colors? Like, it's so interesting that a genuine musical talent needed a dolphin meme for people to understand that she's talented. Like, isn't that so crazy? And I feel like it's not a total inhibitor of what her storytelling is. It's a very general theme and color scheme and way of dressing that coincides with what she's saying, but it's also just so random to me. Like, I don't know. And don't get me wrong, I love the fashion that Zara Larsson creates with small designers such as Paul Aaron, and I love the world. It's beautiful, it's fun, and it's exciting, and it's really good branding. But again, it's like, it's branding, and it's so interesting how this example we have trickles down to people rebranding themselves in ways that are not natural, because we don't have the funds to do an overhaul of our wardrobe, our style, our identities. It's just not natural to real people. And so I think with all of these ideas, that's where we are with personal style, authenticity, self-expression, identity, and I think we're just navigating this world and this internet age, and fashion is sometimes going to take a hit. We're going to forget who we are. I see that a lot. People are always saying, like, I don't know what I want to wear. I don't know who I am in my fashion, and it's because we're inundated with a bit too much, and we don't take a step back and go to a store and really just separate ourselves from what the world is trying to tell us and just look at something and think that's cool or that's not cool. You'll know that you're there when you can look at a bunch of trends as fun, as inspiration, as take some, leave the rest, because you know it already resonates with you, and it's gonna evolve. You're gonna evolve and change and like new things, and maybe you will be convinced to like new things, but maybe those things will stick with you forever. It's all about how close you are to your own interests, hobbies, and way of life, and that's it. I hope you enjoyed. I didn't mean for it to be so long. There's just so much to say, and not a really easy, concise way to say it. Of course there is, but I just want to dive into the words and the thoughts and the contemplation and everything, and it's so much fun. Anyway, you can follow me on social media. I post photography, styling, and outfits. Subscribe if you'd like. I really appreciate it because this has been a fun little journey for me. I love the way that it teaches me how to think and talk and view fashion and just grow and learn every single day. And it's the best. And yeah, hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time.